Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here for the fourth talk of our Museum Studies speaker series. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Stacy Drake, the head of anthropology collections and the collections manager for biological anthropology at the Field Museum in Chicago, who will be speaking with us today about human care for human remains. Stacy's work combines her experiences in archaeology, bioarchaeology, human osteology, repatriation, and anthropological ethics to care for the remains of roughly 5,000 individuals housed at the Field Museum. And prior to her work there, when she joined the museum in 2017, Dr. Drake earned her PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, where she studied mortuary patterns of the ancient Maya of Belize. And through her various roles, she's developed a deep passion for ethical approaches to bioarchaeology and collections management, and strives to facilitate appropriate care, research, and repatriation efforts with descendant communities. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Stacy Drake.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. This is something that we traditionally do before talks in Chicago, so I hope this is all right, but just quickly acknowledging the stewards of the land, the people that call this land home. I understand here it's the Atham and Pipash. And then back in Chicago, we have the Three Fires Confederacy of the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe communities. So just thanking them for and appreciating them for letting us use their land. I've been kind of talking today about how I'm not so sure this presentation will be very revolutionary. I think a lot of the work that we're doing at the field is likely pretty standard. So what I'm really looking forward to, hopefully I will not spend too much time talking so that we can have time for questions and comments. I want to hear thoughts from you all as well, especially because the museum does have a lot of nuance in that we are a public serving institution, which means we also have exhibits. And so there are all of these conversations and questions that we are grappling with, having these different branches of museum work that we are responsible for. So hopefully we'll have a good amount of time for questions and conversation. I'm going to try to remember also to work with both screens because I have my notes. And we'll see. Oh, okay. All right. Somehow that worked. I'm not going to be using any gratuitous images of human remains, but there are some in here. We've got some illustrations of human remains, as well as a CT scan image, and images of a mummified individual within a coffin. So no visible remains, but I do just want to acknowledge that they are in this presentation. And then of course that we will be discussing difficult histories, potentially difficult topics. So I just encourage anyone to take whatever time you may need to be able to engage with this presentation in whatever way suits you best. So I've organized the talk in kind of three little branches. I know that especially just in my time in bioarchaeology and working at the museum, the approach to ethics and considerations of ethics has really morphed over time. So I like this little butterfly as kind of an homage to that. So we'll start with just a brief background of why the museum has human remains and how we got them, where we are today in caring for those individuals, and then kind of summarizing that work as well as addressing some of the possible future challenges and projects that I hope we can take on as this work continues. So we'll start with a background. How many folks have been to the Field Museum? Okay, all right. Really? So we're located in Chicago, Illinois. That's us there right along the lake, lakeside. The museum is one of the largest natural history museums in the country, and so it boasts a collection of 40 million objects and specimens, not just of cultural history, but also of natural history. So we have, archaeological ethnographic material as well as dinosaurs, plants, animals, fish, runs the gamut. Within those 40 million, whatever word you choose here, because it doesn't really fit, we also have 4,500 catalog numbers roughly of humans, which we think represents about 5,000 individuals, like you said. So roughly 5,000 individuals, 4,500 catalog numbers of humans that we need to care for. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here because most of y'all are anthropologists. Is that correct? Okay. Human remains, we do not accession human remains at the Field Museum. We haven't done that for quite some time. The majority of individuals that were brought into the museum came between the 1890s and the 1960s. So I just want to note quickly that we don't accession individuals anymore. A lot of the individuals that we care for came from the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. This was a World's Fair held in Chicago to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And to that end, there was a really large anthropological focus in the exhibition, and a lot of anthropology exhibits, including a lot of focus on race science. So we do have a number of individuals that were collected from communities all around the world, especially from Native communities, kind of under the assumption of the Native individuals that were dying out and could no longer, we had to study them quick before they disappeared. So we have the majority of the museum's collections as a whole come from the World's Columbian Exposition. Before the exposition closed, they wanted to form a museum. So the department store magnate Marshall Field donated $1 million. And in 1894, they opened the Field Columbian Museum of Chicago. So we have a lot of human remains from that time period. And after the foundation of the museum, the institution really wanted to found itself as a research institution. So they started funding expeditions, archaeological, anthropological expeditions across the world. In this second image, this is from an expedition at Kish. This is an ancient Mesopotamian site in Iraq. We have hundreds of individuals from this site. We also occasionally purchased human remains from goodness knows where sometimes. This third image in particular, though, is a semi-decently documented purchase by one of our old curators. There's actually an individual underneath that white thing. The individual was found underneath a frieze with some horses on it, and this is at a cave site in France. She's believed to be 14,000 years old from the Magdalenian period, and she's still on display at the museum currently, colloquially known as Magdalenian woman. So her remains were purchased from the American Museum via this excavation in France. And then we do have occasionally, in the past, there were exchanges between institutions or receiving human remains as donations or gifts from wealthy Chicagoans, other anthropologists around the country. So those are kind of the origins of how we come across individuals or how we accession them. And then I almost forgot. These are some of the major actors from whom most of the individuals that we care for currently, where they originated from or who they were accessioned by. Most people may be familiar with the father of American anthropology, Franz Boas. He was a very early actor at the museum, but he never actually got a job at the institution. He was collecting for the World's Columbian Exposition, and his focus was broadly anthropology, but he was doing a lot of human remains collections as well, particularly focusing on crania, and primarily collecting from the US, the northwest coast of the US and Canada. So we have hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 individuals from Boas and his associates. George Dorsey was one of our early curators. He was curator from 1895 to 1914, and he was a fascinating character. He's ethnographer, forensic anthropologist, archaeologist, and he supposedly completed the first or second. Do you know if it was the first archaeology degree?
I think it was the first.
The first.
PhD.
Yes.
At Harvard.
Yes, the first. Thank you. The first PhD in archaeology, working at the Peruvian necropolis of Ancon. And so we have, through those excavations as well, we have many hundreds of individuals that originated from Dorsey's excavations at Ancon, as well as some of the work that he did in the Northwest Coast too. And then we have Henry Field. He was curator from 1926 to 1941 and really was a true champion of race science. He was very interested in anthropometry, and just like the other men that I've described before him, really intrigued by phenotypic differences between globally diverse communities. But he was so excited by anthropometry that he created an entire exhibit about it. So The Races of Mankind was an exhibit at the museum that lasted from 1933 until 1964. So it had a really long run here, and it really did focus on a lot of anthropometric processes, and including a lot of information collected from human remains that he collected around the world. He is also the individual that was excavating at Kish, that Iraqi site that I showed you, and the purchaser of the Magdalenian woman skeleton that I also discussed in the last slide. And then we kind of have a shift in focus to Paul Martin. He's an archaeologist. He really wasn't focused on human remains in particular, but he's a prominent archaeologist doing excavations in the US Southwest. And as he's uncovering human remains, he's also bringing those to the museum as part of the archaeological collections as a whole. So we have a lot of individuals originating from his excavations as well, but not something that he would have necessarily focused his research on. So we have roughly 5,000 individuals, and now we can kind of talk about how we're caring for them. We all know that the deceased hold great value and significance to humans today. And along with their cultural significances, there are, of course, educational and research value to studying human remains, right? They help inform medical research, history and evolution understandings, and of course, it's important as we are conducting this research that we share our findings and information with the public, right? But it's also very well known now that the processes in which a lot of these individuals were obtaining those human remains for study have been incredibly harmful, not just to the people at the time, but have also instituted a lot of generational trauma. So as workers in a museum like this now, there is this long legacy that we are working to grapple with, right? Some of that ties in with repatriation. Of course, we have NAGPRA from 1990. Since then, we've had a lot of repatriation requests and a lot of focus on repatriation. And we have had even a broader uptick in those types of requests and that work since the new regulations were passed last year in 24. This has created further and increased discussion about, the ethics of human remains, bless you, and how we are caring for individuals and how we are going about repatriation. But I think it's also great that those conversations stemming from NAGPRA are also starting to look at international individuals as well. So we're starting to kind of look beyond just our native North American individuals. So at the Field Museum, like I said, we're trying to kind of grapple between this legacy of the harm that our collections have caused and our collections processes, while also looking forward to how we can work with communities to best address that, while also then serving the general public as part of our fiduciary responsibility as well. So we're looking at how we can care for individuals just beyond repatriation. Before I really get into those processes, I just want to quickly note a few of the things that I have noticed in 10-ish years. I've been at the Field Museum for 9 years now. And just in that time, I've seen a lot of, huge shifts really in behavior. And one of those starts with language. At a museum, a lot of the terminology to refer to everything in the collection is specimen. it's a word that carries a lot of weight, but I don't think it has an intentionality behind it. And so colleagues in anthropology are really careful and focused on the language that we use. We only ever refer to human remains as human remains, individuals, ancestors, whatever feels most appropriate. To the extent that, over the past 9 years, we've had a lot of colleagues come up and ask, like, what language should I be using to refer to what I would normally call a specimen? It's a very simple shift, but I think a shift in your language also leads to a shift in your behavior, right? And so there is an intentionality behind that I think has been really helpful. We also I have seen a huge shift in visibility and transparency. A lot of institutions caring for human remains, it can be a public liability in particular. We were talking about this at lunch, but I wanted to mention, if anyone's familiar with what happened at Penn in 2020, there were 2 very public cases that brought in a lot of community backlash for the way in which they were handling human remains in their collections. And I think institutions are afraid of that, right? And so there was a tendency to not discuss what you are caring for, at least not publicly. But again, in my 9 years, there really has been a complete shift in, okay, we do need to acknowledge this, not only acknowledge the existence of what's in our collections, who's in our collections, but also acknowledge the harm that's caused by those processes and start conversations from there. And to that end, the Field Museum and other institutions are really developing pretty robust policies around human remains care and centralizing those policies within their institutions as well. I'm also seeing a lot of increased attention, like I mentioned earlier, to not just NAGPRA, but how we can care for individuals and cultural items from a community-centered approach, community-guided, ideally. And that goes beyond just caring for collections. So we're approaching communities within and outside of, the kind of NAGPRA dome when we're talking about exhibits, when we're talking about educational programs. It's not just within the collections at the museum. And like I mentioned earlier, we're focusing outside of NAGPRA as well. So NAGPRA kind of gets the conversation started, gets people thinking about how we need to care for individuals from Native North America, but also we have individuals from all over the world that deserve the same, sorts of respect and practices. So this is a heat map of where those roughly 5,000 individuals come from. The darker the red, the more the individuals, or the more catalog numbers. This is actually by catalog number. So we have them by country. In the US, we have them broken down by state and then by province in Canada. So you can see a lot of the human remains that we care for are from the US Southwest, from Peru, Egypt, and Oceania, and some of the Pacific Islands. So lots of global focus that we have to take into consideration with our practices as we're developing them. And not only do these individuals come from a wide geographic variety, they're also preserved in a number of different ways. We have skeletonized individuals in multiple or various states of mummification. Some individuals are represented by a mostly complete body, others by a single element. Or in commingled situations, we have a relatively complete body plus a tooth that may or may not belong to someone else in the collection, which is why I say roughly 5,000 individuals. It's hard to know. Or a situation where you have a large burial site that was broken up by element. So you have maybe 13 individuals, but they are represented by one catalog number of femora, one catalog number of humeri. And they all probably relate to the same individuals, but they're now separated by element. We also have individuals that are preserved in liquid. These are going to be more modern medical examples, and those require special care that I'll talk about in a moment. So they have to be handled differently than everyone else. We do have hair clippings. A couple years ago, maybe 2 years at this point, we made a public announcement that we had uncovered 111 hair clippings from Native North America, but we have thousands from elsewhere in the world as well that we're working to grapple with. And then that's only about 50% of the actual stuff that we care for, not to call humans stuff, but we do have other stuff that derives from them as well. All of the data sheets that were collected about them, all of the measurements that these older anthropometric focused folks were taking. With Henry Field, he had also hired a sculptor to create casts and models of certain individuals that were being studied. Photographs, data sheets, all of that information is also stuff that we have to care for and share with communities and house as well. I want to note too that all of the individuals that we care for, except for those liquid preserved individuals, are housed in one facility. The liquid ones, of course, the alcohol preserved individuals have to be stored in a special place because we don't have the proper safety measures. But the other interesting thing is they come from different contexts, and so they're actually accessioned into different departments of the museum. So most of these individuals are cared for under the anthropology branch of collections and research, but we do have some individuals that were accessioned under geology department for like very old kind of archaeofaunal individuals, not archaeofaunal, but more paleontological. But a lot of them are housed within faunal collections. So that's been a fun project. And then of course we have these historical medical individuals and some other individuals that were accessioned in the zoology department. So there are different accession departments for caring for these individuals, but they're all housed and treated and cared for in the same ways to the best of our ability. If that kind of makes sense. So hopefully that's kind of painted a picture of how difficult it can be to care for all of these in a semi-standard and appropriate way. Different communities that we're working with, different preservation conditions, different departments. Like I mentioned, everyone is housed in one room except for a few. And we've really worked hard to standardize our documentation to the best of our ability. We did use NAGPRA as kind of our baseline. Whatever we would document for whatever processes we would use for documentation and consultation with a NAGPRA consultation, we kind of use that as our baseline. This is the information that our tribal community partners have expressed wanting, so we will collect that information across the board. We have these kind of standard documentation packets. This is a skeletal map of one of them so that community partners don't have to view images of human remains. We just color in a skeletal map. That's one page of anywhere from 5 to 7 that we will fill out for each catalog number. And in those processes, we document minimum number of individuals that are represented, age and sex, and other kind of demographic information. We document preservation conditions, and then any potential cultural modification or pathology or trauma that we note as well. And the goal, like I said, is to collect kind of a baseline of information that tribal partners have expressed wanting in the past, that people have, we also in developing these packets, we're consulting with other partners and community members from the US and Canada as well to see what information they wanted us to be documenting. This was back in 2017. So at this point, prior to the new regs of NAGPRA coming out in 24, we had actually documented almost all of our Native North American human remains and rehoused them before 2020. So that was a project that lasted from 2017 to 2020. So we have standardized and complete documentation of all of those individuals. And then before the deadline in 24, we finished the last few that hadn't been addressed by that project. Everybody is also rehoused in a similar way, again, to the best of our ability. We're kind of limited in our space. You can see these drawers they're all the same size, essentially. But we had these boxes that were kind of custom made in multiple different sizes that fit in these drawers. It's all natural, recyclable material that can break down. It's all, of course, archive safe as well. And for a box like this, we're using a few different kinds of paper so that we can provide support, but also soft protection for the remains. And then using muslin bags to collect smaller elements. And the nice thing about these is they can also be modified. Same thing with the documentation. If a certain community wishes that we house an individual one way or another, we can change those things. One easy thing is taking off the lid. Some communities want those individuals to be able to breathe, so we take off the lid, put that on the bottom. It's there if we need it. We also will use different materials. We have used, red fabric or other types of muslin within the boxes. Sometimes we've bundled individuals at the request of a community. We also conduct regular feedings for some of the individuals under our care, and have incorporated offerings with individuals as well. We have standardized processes for photography, the way that we photograph and which photographs we're taking for everyone. And then, of course, digitizing all of this in our incredibly complex and soon to be semi-updated so that it looks like it actually was made in the 2000s. We've got this massive database system that relates for the entire museum. But the nice thing about it here is we can include all of this information and anything that we're getting from consultation. So any duty of care requests, I can use the database to track this feeding. So every 6 months, I need to go feed these individuals. The database will send a reminder to do this. So it's really great to track. And then when I'm gone, someone else will be able to track that all of this information was being conducted and who we were consulting with. It's all great to be able to keep in this database. So that's a little bit about the physical care. But we also have, a lot of people coming through the museum. Again, it's a public space. The museum still prides itself as a research institution. So we do get, not only are we a public serving institution, we're a research institution, we get a lot of research requests. We also get community visit requests. But the human remains facility is almost entirely off limits. We do not take any tours down into that space. There are very limited staff that have access to this. I think it's like five badge swipes to get through just that room. And then if we have a researcher or a community who wishes to visit certain remains, either for their study or their ancestors, for the most part, we will opt to pull those individuals to a separate private room where they can be interacted with, so that we're trying to the goal is to create the least amount of disturbance in this space. We really try to treat it as a sacred space. However, this is the space where we conduct documentation, so there are people working in this space. And occasionally, if it's a large research project, or if a community wants to come in and conduct a smudging, or we've had singing in this space as well. There's wiggle room within these rules, right? Where we will allow some folks to come in for certain reasons. And we're not only caring for the deceased individuals, but we want to make sure that we're doing our best to care for their living descendants as well. So none of this is perfect. And again, I hope that y'all are thinking of things to ask and provide insight into later. But one of the ways that we feel we can do the best by communities is by being open and transparent. We're also trying to tread that line, though, of not sharing too much information that can be damaging or upsetting to a community, which is a fine line to walk. But again, we've kind of used NAGPRA as our baseline. It used to be, way back when, that the NAGPRA website had a CUI database where you could actually see information about individuals housed within collections, very basic info. I know this is hard to read, but essentially we have catalog number, a brief description of what that catalog number represents, the individuals or elements present, where they're from, and then sometimes they will also say age and sex and MNI. So we created a website to be able to share that information. The NAGPRA website had been really difficult to look at, and I think eventually they got rid of that CUI database entirely. So we have this on our website for our North American individuals that are not yet affiliated. So if a tribal community wants to know which individuals we have from Cook County, Illinois, they can search by this on the database and come up with this list. So we're trying to be transparent in letting folks know that we have individuals, but retain some information until it's appropriate to share with specific community representatives. And And in that vein, we're also trying to be really open and flexible in our communication styles. You know, it can be really difficult to hold. Not every tribe is going to have internet access for Zoom meetings constantly. So we want to make sure they don't have the time because they are very busy doing everything else that representatives within their community will have to do. So trying to be really flexible with communication styles too, so that whatever works for the community is what we're trying to engage with, be that letters, email, phone calls, visits, physical visits, either to the museum or to the community, or Zoom meetings. And of course, any of these procedures can be modified and to the best of our ability. And then in 2024, just last year, we finally established the Center for Repatriation, Tribal Relations, and Provenance Research within the museum. So this center crosses all different departments. So if anyone has questions about tribal relations at the museum within our education department, they go to the center. If they're working within exhibits and they want to work with communities, ideally they're working through the center. Human remains that are housed within our geology, or not housed, but accessioned within our geology department, they're working through the center and me, so that it is more centralized. At my time in the museum, I've seen our repatriation department go from one person, oftentimes, not often, but occasionally we had just one person, and then staff like me and other people trying to kind of help as we could, to 3 at the most, until the center was developed, and now we have at least 8 people working on these different, so provenance, tribal relations, and repatriation, NAGPRA and international. So we've really put money and resources where it's needed, but just last year. So we're getting there. It's been improving for sure. And then one of the last things that we're working on in currently caring for individuals is figuring out, what do we do about exhibiting human remains? As a public institution, as a bioarchaeologist as well, I do see some benefit in viewing human remains at a museum. It is the one space in the US really where you can engage with the deceased individual and start to really kind of understand things like death and the afterlife, and engaging with concepts surrounding this. That doesn't necessarily mean we need it, right? But we're trying to kind of grapple with, there's also a public interest in it, especially the Egyptian mummified individuals at the Field Museum are our second highest public draw outside of Sue the dinosaur. So people come to see the dinosaurs, or they come to see the mummies. And there's a huge educational value within that. But again, that doesn't necessarily make it right. So we're trying to grapple with these ideas of, what do people want to see? What will they learn from engaging in this way? And does that make it okay? I had another thought on that, but I lost it. But in general, what we have decided at the moment is there are some individuals on display. We make sure that it's not, a gratuitous kind of, we're not just showing bodies to show bodies. We try to make sure that everyone is contextualized. Their presence is necessary to whatever story is being told by that specific exhibit. And then we're wanting to incorporate as much biographical information as possible. When someone encounters a deceased person in an exhibit, we want them to understand this is a deceased person. This is a human who deserves respect. This is some of the information about who that person was. In particular, we're working right now, it's not necessarily always possible, or it doesn't exist right now in our ancient Egypt exhibit, but we're working to incorporate their names. Some of the names of the individuals are present, but we have more that we know that we need to add into the exhibits. But we also recognize that not everybody wants to encounter human remains when they visit an institution. So we have created little signs marking any area outside of an exhibit where human remains are visible. We've also created maps of the public spaces where human remains are visible, so that we can hand those to community partners when they're visiting, so they can avoid those spaces if they wish. And then in some of the more recent exhibits, these two images on the left are from the first King's exhibit that was developed by Field Museum curators. It had this great, it worked with individuals from Europe, and I really liked the setup because they created these pods within the overall exhibit. So human remains were sectioned off. You could not view them from that kind of public opening. There would be a sign there that said there are depictions of a burial or an actual burial present in this section. People could go inside of that space and engage if they wished, or keep on moving through and not necessarily miss much of the exhibit and the story by bypassing that. So we're really working to kind of separate spaces within the exhibit as well, so that people can have autonomy in whether or not they're viewing human remains. So that's some of what we're engaging with now. And I want to wrap up in the last, oh, we're doing okay. Okay, good. Sorry if I've been flying by. I'm very excited. Want to kind of go over some of, what I think we still need to do, and some of the challenges that I foresee, and things that I hope that we're going to engage with in the future. So I want to continue on this theme of exhibition. Is it appropriate to exhibit human remains? I think that answer is going to be dependent on every single person, right? Everyone's going to have a different opinion. So in some ways, the institution just has to make a decision and stick with it, right? I imagine we will continue to display human remains to the public, especially of our ancient Egyptian individuals. When we are displaying human remains, I forgot to mention in the last slide, but we are also working to the best of our ability to identify communities to consult with. But in some instances, that's very difficult, or somewhat impossible. It's never impossible, but trying to communicate at least with, let's use ancient Egypt as an example, communicate with modern Egyptians, Coptic Christians, the Egyptian government. I don't know who exactly makes that final call, but at least you have these conversations to help guide whatever decisions you're making. But then we are grappling with what appropriate display means. Some institutions for their ancient Egyptian individuals are now only exhibiting individuals within their coffins. So you're never coming across an actual human visually, but they're contained within their coffin, and that coffin is on display. So that's a route we could consider. One of our most famous individuals, though, his name is Harwa. He is someone who was partially unwrapped, right? That was a very common practice back when he was collected, and most of his body is covered. We also have his coffin, so that's an option. His face is visible. In some ways, I feel like being able to see the human face of an individual is a more humanizing aspect if you're really trying to get that concept across to a visitor. But again, that doesn't necessarily make it appropriate. So we're questioning, do you show any visible skin? Do you only show individuals that are wrapped or housed within their coffins? We also have done a recent CT scanning initiative where in 2024, we scanned all of our ancient Egyptian individuals that are on display. It's incredible data, and we're learning so much about these individuals and who they were as people, what practices were utilized at the time to prepare their bodies. We've also discovered the names of some individuals that we hadn't necessarily seen before we were able to do this project, at least one individual. So we've got this incredible information that in the idea of sharing that information with the public, you would want to potentially show some of these CT scans. We have done this in the past. This bottom image is a family engaging with a CT interactive that is in our ancient Egypt exhibit, in which some of the scans have been segmented, and you can look at the different layers of a mummy. You can look at the coffin, the wrappings, the body, and the skeleton, and then any burial items that were included with that individual. And this simple little table it holds the most interaction time throughout any other interactive exhibit in the museum. So more than our dinosaurs, more than anything else, people are spending the most time with this table, looking at the scans. That said, these are real scans of a real person, and like a smaller version, essentially an accurate version of that body that people are manipulating. They're unwrapping. Their little kids are zooming in on the crotch, right? Like there are issues to this. Is the educational value and the fact that people are engaging with it, does that outweigh all of the other potential concerns within that? I hope you all have answers, because I definitely don't. And then of course, going back to what we talked about earlier, what we will continue to do if we continue to display human remains is provide as much context as we can, create signage so that people can opt in or out of seeing and engaging with the sign or with the exhibits, and then prioritizing and seeking out community input whenever possible. So let's see. We also are working to improve our community guided care. There is this general increase and emphasis on a commitment to community consultation. And thankfully at institutions like the museum and elsewhere, it's not just under the confines of NAGPRA anymore, right? And it's also not doing the bare minimum of NAGPRA. It's really trying to actually engage and build relationships with communities if they want those relationships. Sometimes they just want to work with you and then never see you again. That's also okay. We're happy with that as well. So we really want to try to continue to practice these kind of flexible standards that we've developed and modify them as much as needed. At the museum, we have created a community space. We call it the chill space, and it's a small little room that needs so much work, but it is a private space where communities can go, visitors can sit, they can smudge or conduct any other sort of ceremony that's necessary, because a lot of times these visits to the museum are incredibly difficult and exhausting. The museum is also just huge, so even if it's not emotionally taxing, it's physically taxing. So we're trying to make spaces where communities can just relax for a moment while being on site and talk amongst themselves without staff being in their space all the time. And then, like I mentioned as well, I'm really working to incorporate offerings and care practices into our daily work. One of the projects that I'm really excited that we're doing, but is going to take a lot of funding and support to do it actually more systematically, is incorporating funerary items with their individuals. At the museum, things are separated by type. So you have, ceramics and in one house storage area because they require different preservation than the faunal remains, than the human remains. So if we know that we have an ancestor and some of their items, if we can get them to fit in those limited spaces within human remains storage, we will incorporate those AFOs to the best of our ability. But this is ad hoc right now. It's really what tribe are we working with on what repatriation request at the moment. We can bring those AFOs in if they would like us to. Like I said, I hope that this becomes a more systematic process eventually, but that's going to take a much more substantial effort. But we'll continue to do it ad hoc as we can. And then, of course, we're working to identify more groups to work with, to engage with. And one of the things that the museum has developed are these advisory committees. We had one for the opening of the Native Truths Hall. So we now have a Native American Advisory Committee. They helped with the development of that hall, but we are continuing to work with them long after that hall has been developed. And they don't necessarily have a determining body or power within the institution, but they have FaceTime with our board, with our president, and they listen to our concerns and needs on the staff side, and we listen to theirs as well. And they really help guide a lot of the work regarding Native American exhibits, education practices, and collections and research work as well throughout the institution. And now that we're working on our Halls of Africa, we also have an African American advisory group that we're working with at the museum. So the more that we start working with these communities, I think the more established those advisory committees will become as well. And a couple of the other things, we're going to continue documenting and rehousing individuals. I mentioned we've got our roughly 1,400 catalog numbers of North American individuals documented and rehoused, but that leaves the rest of the 4,500 to go. So we're focusing on, we've actually started working on South America. Within that, though, we have a lot of mummified individuals from South America that really need some good conservation treatment. And so that, again, is kind of a project that I will hopefully be coming down the pike, but that's going to require a large grant and a lot of work with conservators as well. And then, of course, working with, most of these individuals are Peruvian, but, working with appropriate communities to guide that work. So that's something that I hope, but that kind of falls outside of the typical documentation process that we would do for the rest of the individuals. And then just continuing to build on community relationships, consultation efforts, repatriation efforts. I was in Arizona last fall working on the largest repatriation that we have ever accomplished at the museum. It was 300 individuals and a couple thousand items. And we're continuing to work with that group on the next iteration. It's a long-standing, ongoing process with this community because we have so much material from them. But in these processes, really working with our transparency, improving and expanding our website. I showed a little part of the website where it just shows information from North America. We need to show information from the rest of the world now to the best of our ability. And then we want to continue to expand our communication with different community groups and continue not just our NAGPRA repatriations, but repatriations that fall outside of NAGPRA and international repatriations as well, which the museum has done since before 1990, but we are continuing to expand our international work and then also considering things like digital repatriation, where at least within the last version of NAGPRA, certain materials didn't fall under the considerations and the categories that NAGPRA established. So what we did instead is we worked with the community. They brought a photographer that we paid for to come and take incredible images of their items. And then the community has the rights to all of those images. So if any image is used, you have to go through the community to get that permission. It's not perfect, but we're trying to always kind of think about other ways that we can facilitate repatriation as well. So I want to leave with just this poem that I found from Jenny Davis about what it can be like to care for human remains sometimes. I just thought it was a nice, sad, but nice kind of recognition of the work. And I can come back to this in a moment, but I will end here and just thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for all of you for hosting me. And I look forward to your questions and comments.
Oh, what about research? Isn't that the reason you have all this? People thought that they wanted to get out of this stuff to learn something from it. You haven't really talked much about. Is there current research? Is there research
Yes.
planned for the future? Or what?
Yes, that's a good question. I did not address that much. So we do have research qualifications essentially. So especially for human remains research, we have a form, or we have specific questions that we really want people. It's a much more substantial research packet. We have a general research packet for conducting research on items, but for human remains, it has different categories that we're really looking for. And then we have a team of curators and collections managers that review each research packet to determine whether or not we can schedule and move forward with that request.
But what kind of research?
For North America human remains, there are none, except we did just complete one that was at the request and organization of a community. So there was a tribe that was working with a biological anthropologist and sent her out to conduct research to bring back to the community. Otherwise, we do have a lot of action right now with our South American individuals. And with the CT scanning of these Egyptian individuals, we're starting to get research requests for those as well. Does that answer your question?
Well, I still have no idea what kind of research. What are people trying to
What are
learn?
they looking at? I'm trying to think too, like what I can share. There's a lot of mobility questions, especially within South America. We do have some destructive requests where they're trying to look at where people are coming from. Someone else is looking at not only diet, but disease and where these people are from and what they're eating relates to any pathological conditions they're expressing through their skeletal remains. Yeah, it's the one that I'm thinking of the most. And then again, with the CT scans, we're looking at a lot of disease and body breakdown, as well as conservation treatment. So the scans are helping us guide how we might care for these individuals in the future too.
Just to follow up, would you say that the museum is kind of following practices in place around research in each community of origin and trying to understand what's permitted and what's not permitted based on the local practices and how they are interacting with
Yes.
deceased?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And actually what we're continuing on is something that you started, where especially for South America, we have individuals from those regions practicing, bioarc, specialists from the regions weighing in on these. So if we get a request, we are also asking people from those areas to consider whether or not that request is something they find valid and significant to support.
So as someone who's completely outside of this field, I just have a general question. You talked a lot about reaching out to local communities to discuss repatriation and how these human remains should be cared for. But I'm wondering, we all know these communities, whether they're indigenous or what have you, are not homogenous, right? So do you ever get conflicting requests? Like the leadership says, please repatriate these human remains, but other community organizations said, no, you don't need to do that. Or someone says, please care for them this way according to ancient rituals. Someone says, no, that's bad, don't do that. Or do these communities always speak in one voice? So like when you reach out to them, who do you reach out to?
Yes, that is a very good question. So, to answer the first part, everybody has their own opinion, right? And that does make it really difficult, especially when we have our own native staff working on things. What we have to follow legally from NAGPRA, and then also building off of that, is to the best of our ability, we are making decisions based on input from elected leaders within that community. So for Native tribes, that would be their tribal historic preservation officer, their tribal chairperson, someone who is elected as an authority in that community. But that definitely, just because the tribal chairperson says one thing doesn't mean the entire community falls behind it. And that then gets more difficult when we're talking about international communities where maybe they're not recognized by their government. Now, do we have to work with the government on behalf of those people and hope that they're making the right decision? That's the part where I personally don't know exactly how we go about those things yet. But yes, to the best of our ability, for decision-making purposes, it is with someone who is representing their community in an official way. Yeah. And then we'll come to you, Ryan.
Yeah.
So the 2024 regulations gave more explicit deference to the tribes in the identification of cultural items. How is your board handling requests of other than human ancestors and sacred objects and cultural patrimony that in the past archaeologists refuted?
That's a really good question. I feel bad because I hesitate to answer that because I specifically work with our human remains and not with our repatriation center. But thinking about some recent requests that we have had, typically the way things work at the institution is, the board is concerned about the fiduciary responsibilities, but they have also been relatively deferential in recent requests that I'm thinking of to whatever the recommendation of the staff have been. And then the staff, of course, following NAGPRA are more deferential to those tribal requests. So that's my way of going around answering your question. That I think there is more understanding and flexibility, even within higher levels of the museum. Does that kind of answer? Did you have a question too?
Oh, I was just gonna, I mean, kind of following up on the international question, so you did your actual training as a bioarchaeologist and did your PhD in Mexico?
Belize, yeah.
Belize, sorry. How has that influenced your kind of treatment and care of remains today? And what's your understanding? Like, how do you work with, I know we have Field Museum has collections from Belize.
Yeah.
So how do you work with those communities that you had your own special relationship with?
This is actually something we were talking about at lunch, because when I was going through my training, what I had been told was where we were working, there were no more Maya living where we were. So even when I would ask, who should we be talking to about this? Can we reach out to local people? The workmen are telling me this person might be their great-great-grandfather. What do you mean there's no Maya living here? They clearly feel, if not a genetic connection, at least a cultural connection to these individuals. That wasn't the standard then, and as a student, I didn't have much sway. So my experience back then was, and that's not to discredit anyone that I was working with either, and it's also not to just say, well, that's how it was, back in the day, and things have changed now. A couple of years later, a student that was just a few years behind me was able to make more change and able to actually get input from community members and Maya folks living in the area. But it definitely has changed my shift. I mean, I think working with individuals, and especially when you have, someone working at the site who is from the area who's like, hey, is that my great-great-grandfather? You're like, oh, maybe actually. And it really does help shift your perspective. But I think not only has the field changed, but, my own kind of practices as well have evolved, if you will, improved over time, to where I don't think I would excavate. The rule when I was excavating was if a burial becomes exposed because of the environmental conditions, we excavate them to best protect them. I don't know if I would do that anymore. I'm not the director. I don't, I don't know all of those things for sure, but I think I definitely have more framework and questions about my own practice. I haven't excavated in decade now, but I think my experiences now, and especially having the ability and the blessing to work with community members, has really shifted that perspective.
So repatriation, regardless if it's NAGPRA or national, takes a tremendous amount of labor.
Yes.
Are you incorporating students in any aspects of it?
We do have intern work. It depends on the project and the community. So we recently did a review of the non-human faunal material that's from archaeological collections. A lot of our Native American advisors, we approached them as kind of our first, go-to. They said we probably wouldn't be comfortable having an undergraduate student work on this. We would prefer staff work on that. Our osteology staff, though, is me and one person who's hired on for a very specific project for 3 years. So we are trying to incorporate, I've got 5,000 individuals to document. So we do actually, the first project before the new NAGPRA regulations, we did have student interns working on documenting human remains, and we still do continue. I have some volunteers and interns to help with that project. But when it comes to specific communities and specific projects, we would go through the community first for permission. But yeah, we need the help.
Are you still continuing to work with like Loyola, and I know UIC has retired, but they both had, I think, students through the osteologists that were.
Yeah. Ann Grauer was bringing her students through, but she also, I think, just in her program has kind of had to step back her work too, so that they're coming to the museum maybe once. But they had actually helped us document a lot of our medically obtained individuals that came from local hospitals. So we haven't had as much engagement from the university.
In recent years.
Oh. When you're talking about having individuals on display
Mhm.
and particularly with the display board, you said got like the most interaction, which is really awesome. Do you have that data for education? Is there an avenue where you can do the same CT scans, but maybe on a model and get the same kind of interaction?
On a model of a human? Possibly. But for the most part, those models are gonna come from regular human, like other humans, right? We might be able, I mean, I suppose we could potentially. I'm sure there are, I don't actually know, I'm sure there are mock-ups of human models that aren't exact replicas of a real person, but a lot of that data is coming from humans anyway, so. Right, exactly. I don't know if that makes it much better. I genuinely don't. Like, I'm not trying to argue against it. I think AI can do that, but again, it's still using human data, just maybe conglomerate data instead of one specific individual. That's a possibility. The other benefit, though, is if you're looking at the scan and then looking at the person, you're making even more connection while you're engaging, possibly. Right, so if we have a scan of Harwa and Harwa's standing right there, and you can be like, oh my gosh, I do see how beautiful his teeth are in the scan and in his actual person, because he has an incredible dental arcade. I feel like that potentially provides a lot of info. We also have scans of animal bodies, so maybe we take the human out entirely and just engage with the animal scans. But yeah, I'll have to think about that. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah. What kind of exhibits do you have now with regards to Native Americans? Or are they still being developed? And do they include consultation with your Native American advisory?
Yes, 100%. So we have Native Truths opened in 22, 23. So that was led by and guided by community members that were represented in that exhibit. And within that exhibit, we also have rotating exhibits. So Woolly Dogs is about to open. I'm very excited about this. It's all about the woolly dogs that I think are now extinct, but lived in the Northwest coast. And we have a lot of Salish weaving using the woolly dog wool. So I'm really excited about that one. We have native metal that'll be coming up. I actually don't know if I can mention these, but about metal music within Native communities. We just had one on not lacrosse, stickball. So those communities are guiding those stories, and the advisory committee then serves as a way to say, hey, here are some of the stories we think you might want to pursue, and here are the people you need to talk to, because the people on the board aren't necessarily super big fans of Native metal, or the committee, but they might know who to talk to.
Are you gonna have a metal concert?
I don't know, but I really hope so. I mean, we have to.
Yes.
We had an Africa fashion show open up, and we had a fashion show at the museum, so we have to.
If you do, it's gonna be loud.
I mean, if NASCAR can come near the museum campus every year, I'm sure we can figure out how to hold a metal concert. Watch the space. That should be fun.